and welcome to chapter 17. So this is significant as it's the end of the first half of the novel. And thank you again for joining me. And if you haven't done so, like, comment, subscribe, notification bell. I'm going to keep on going with these and we will get there. We're already just at the halfway mark, as I say. So without further ado, let's continue. So we know that Catherine is dead. And the chapter opens with a bit of pathetic fallacy here. So we have the weather broke, the wind shifted from the south to northeast, rain. Then we could hardly imagine there have been 3 weeks of summer. Wintry drifts are coming in. So the death of Catherine, again, her connection to nature that Bronte establishes is very much in evidence here. When she dies, the weather turns bad. It's simple but effective, obviously. We've got Edgar. My master kept his room. I took possession of the lonely parlour, converting it into a nursery. So Edgar Linton is withdrawn. So really, again, there's a big theme really of mental health effectively in this, and go look at the impact of Catherine's death on Edgar Linton as well. Then we've got a surprise appearance here, because who's come through the door? When the door opened, some person entered out of breath and laughed. It's Isabella. Of all people, she's managed to run away from Wuthering Heights. As she says here, I have run the whole way from Wuthering Heights, says a perfect quotation, exclamatory sentence there for you. So she's effectively another narrator here, but it's another sub-narrator where we've got, obviously remember that we've got Lockwood telling us what Nelly's saying, and at this point it's Lockwood telling, well obviously it's Bronte writing overall, but Lockwood is telling us what Nelly was told by Isabella. So in suspiciously high level of detail. But let's not think too hard about that. We don't want to unweave the rainbow, do we? But anyway, there shall be an explanation as soon as I can give it. Only just have the goodness to step out and order the carriage and take me on to Gimmerton and tell a servant to seek up a few clothes in my wardrobe. So she's running away from her husband because of all the violence that she's experienced. Well, you'll see that in more detail here as well. Now, she's very dishevelled, so add to this a deep cut under one ear, as her clothes are all wet as well, which only the cold prevented from bleeding profusely, a white face scratched and bruised, and a frame hardly able to support itself through fatigue. So a lot of these physical signs could be from the journey that she's taken, but I think some of them will be from signs of abuse from Heathcliff, I think is very likely as well. Then we have, look to the next page, put poor Catherine's baby away. I don't like to see it. This poor baby isn't very loved. It doesn't have a great start to life, as Nelly describes in the last chapter. Significantly here, symbolically, so Bronte has Isabella take off her wedding ring and throw it on the floor. I'll smash it. And she continued striking it with childish spite and then burned it. And she took and dropped the misused article among the coals. So Isabella, I used to think when I first read the novel, definitely my first impressions of her in the early phases of the novel, I thought of her as a very kind of weak character. But actually, I was wrong. There's a lot of steel about Isabella. At first, yes, she is very kind of soft, like Edgar Linton as well. But she's actually what she endures at the hands of Heathcliff and how she deals with it and the level of bravery she shows in this era to do what she does, which is run away from her abusive husband and set up on her own and have a child on her own and bring up the child on her own. That is brave for the era and incredibly difficult. We don't know. We don't actually even find out how she manages to survive, but she does. That's all we need to know. So she definitely has a kind of inner steel to her, definitely. And I think this act of defiance here, this also supports that too. Then I won't come suing for his assistance. So she doesn't think I'm going to come back begging for help from Edgar Linton. She knows it's over in terms of how he treats her. He's been vile to her actually as well, isn't he? So she's striking out on her own. Then more kind of supernatural, demonic kind of Lexis here as a monster of that's Heathcliff being described by this appellation of an incarnate goblin. But as an evil spirit, effectively. Then I ought and I wish to remain, should cheer Edgar and take care of the baby for two things, because the Grange is my right home. But I tell you, he wouldn't let me. Edgar Linton wouldn't let her do that. Isabella is, yeah, that's completely logical from Isabella, isn't it? The idea of she's left Heathcliff, she could live at Thrushcross Grange, she could take care of the baby, she could take care of Edgar Linton. And many sisters lived with their brothers for their whole life. It wasn't unusual because women were completely dependent on men for, well, I was going to say income, but support. And women didn't generally, a lot of women didn't have jobs. Some women did, but most women couldn't really get a job for themselves, particularly Isabella as a member of the gentry. So she's a bit more, upper class, definitely as well. She hasn't got a lot of options in life. So this is what I mean about defiance and independence and spirit about her as a character there as well. So Heathcliff, she knows, would chase him. It's strong enough to make me feel pretty certain that he would not chase me over England. Suppose I contrived a clear escape, and therefore I must quite get away. She knows Heathcliff would never leave the area where Catherine was buried, so she can escape. She's just got to get out of the area. In a lot of Gothic fiction, you have particularly female characters who are locked up. That theme of confinement. We've already seen that in Wuthering Heights, with a sense of what the younger Catherine, as in young Cathy, at the start of the novel, she's pretty much trapped at Wuthering Heights as well. We've had Catherine, the original version. She was confined when she was ill and also when she was attacked by the dog. There's plenty of that. So Gothic fiction, particularly with a spooky house, you've got that with Wuthering Heights, obviously, and Isabella's been trapped there, and a menacing male figure. You've obviously got that in Heathcliff as well, and you've got the dogs, and you've got the hostility of Hareton and Joseph and Hindley, and you've got all of that going on as well. So we have, even if he had doted on me, the devilish nature would have revealed its existence somehow. I think this is also quite an interesting way of thinking about one of the themes of the novel, isn't it? It's like nature versus nurture, really. How much of Heathcliff is based on a kind of an innate badness that he has, or is some of it just because how he was brought up? Well, I think Bronte leaves that open to you to decide, really, because we've got Nelly's very inconsistent support for Heathcliff. Sometimes she's against him, sometimes she's for him, sometimes she facilitates meetings with Heathcliff and Catherine. So I think that is actually part of Bronte leaving it for us to decide as well. We can think the same thing. Is Heathcliff bad because he's born bad, or is Heathcliff bad because he was made bad by the upbringing he's had? To me, I think the badness comes from his experiences in childhood. The clue for me is that first image right at the start of the novel when Lockwood sees the trees that have been bent and shaped by the extreme weather of Wuthering Heights. To me, that suggests, I think there's a clue that it's how you're brought up is affecting you as you're older, rather than innate badness. But anyway, it's it's a debate, isn't it? It's something to think about. Then people feel with their hearts, Ellen, and since he has destroyed mine, I've not the power to feel for him, and I would not, though he groaned from this to his dying day and wept tears of blood for Catherine. So remember, they're married, they're husband and wife, but again, romantic theme of strong emotion. Heathcliff, his true love is Catherine, and of course, Isabella would never be able to compete with this, and Heathcliff detests Isabella for being a Linton. That's part of it as well, isn't it? But tears of blood, interesting metaphor. Again, the extremity of Heathcliff's emotion goes far beyond what we normally think about love, and also very kind of violent, emotive imagery that isn't typical as well of signs of devotion of love as well, isn't it? Tears of blood. It's very, very emotive, very strong imagery, passionate imagery. So we get an account of why Hindley wasn't at the funeral as well, and he'd been drinking all day, gin or brandy by tumblerfuls, not to be confused with Mr. Tumble. I was going to say something about this here. But I realised that it could be a bit of a spoiler, and I've just deleted a whole wad of information I was going to say. However, if you know, you know, right? That links to something later on in the novel. But I'm going to not say, right? In case you're going through this as you're reading it at the same time. So I'm going to be respectful of spoilers there. So I've just deleted that bit. Then we have, there he continued praying like a Methodist, only the deity he implored is senseless dust and ashes, and God when addressed when he was curiously confounded with his own black father. This is again, the way that Isabella's speaking, there's some circumlocution here, which is a term for when you're talking around something. He's swearing kind of against God, but he's also kind of invoking the devil as well, is what she's heard him do. So that's his prayers aren't, she's not seeing them as normal. That's effectively what's happening there. But again, it's more devil imagery, really, or not so much imagery, but connotations of the devil connected to that as well with Heathcliff, those associations. Then, after concluding these precious orisons, which is a really nice archaic word for prayers, I always like that word, then he grew hoarse and his voice was strangled and he thought he would be off again, always straight down to the grange. So Heathcliff has been down there, obviously it's part of his mourning process. He's very violent, physical, passionate, but passionate in the sense of extreme emotion in terms of his mourning. This season of deliverance from degrading oppression is a holiday. So for Isabella, when he leaves to go and mourn, that gives her a bit of a break from him. So it seems so dismal to go upstairs and the wild snow blowing outside, and my thoughts continue reverting to the kirkyard and the new-made grave. So Isabella thinking about the death of Catherine there as well. It was very, very sad, and while I read I sighed, for it seemed as if all joy had vanished from the world, never to be restored. So Bronte's using some hyperbole there to highlight Isabella's despairing state. So Heathcliff comes back from one of his jaunts. I say jaunts, it's not really a good word, but for this anyway. Then, as Heath is trying to get in, they lock him out. Hindley says, "You and I have each a great debt to settle with a man out yonder. I'm weary of enduring now, and I'd be glad of a retaliation that wouldn't recoil on myself, but treachery and violence are spears pointed at both ends. They wound those who resort to them worse than their enemies." So remember what I said about Isabella having more depth to her as a character than I definitely originally thought myself when I read the novel. But that's very wise words. You're saying if you kind of take revenge on him, it's really going to affect... It's effectively a two-pointed spear where one of those spears is going to hurt you. But Hindley's return, treachery and violence are just a return for treachery and violence. What's happening here is Bronte is deliberately evoking effectively like Old Testament Christianity versus kind of New Testament Christianity, effectively. So Isabella's is more turn the other cheek, the Jesus kind of response of she endures the suffering she has in almost like a martyr, really. She just endures this. She doesn't strike out. She does use words against Heathcliff, but she doesn't return or attempt any kind of brutality back against him in any way. Physically, she probably wouldn't be able to anyway. But significantly, it's this idea of these wise words here. It's a very, very kind of Christian sense of not taking revenge. Whereas Hindley's philosophy here is much more of the Old Testament eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Match your revenge to the treatment you've seen yourself. It's much more like that, more kind of punitive. So if you're writing about religion and exploring that in the novel, then that's a little interesting little point there. And what happens is that in a minute you see Hindley does try and take physical revenge against Heathcliff, and he does suffer. The two-pointed spear does effectively hurt him as well. So Isabella is shown to be correct and wise as well for her approach. I'm sure you would have as much pleasure as I in witnessing the conclusion of the fiend's existence. He'll be your death unless you overreach him, and he'll be my ruin. Hindley wants to conspire with Isabella to take out Heathcliff. Promise to hold your tongue, and before that clock strikes, it wants 3 minutes of 1, you're a free woman. So he wants to kill Heathcliff, and then Isabella will benefit from this, and he wants her to help doing this, but she can't bring herself to do that. You better open the door, he answered, addressing me by some elegant term that I don't care to repeat. So Bronte uses irony here, and again, this is deliberately obscured. It's some swear word. Choose your own swear word. I would guess it would be as strong as you could imagine, whatever the swear word. Probably something misogynistic directed at Isabella. He wants her to unlock the door. I thought it would be a blessing for him should Heathcliff put him out of misery, as in she in some ways thinks if Heathcliff were to kill Hindley, that would actually be a release for Hindley as well. What a blessing for me should he send Heathcliff to his right abode. So she admits there is some temptation here on it if Hindley were to kill Heathcliff. Obviously, contextually for the time, this is, really quite shocking stuff for contemporary readers if you think about all the implications of what's happening here. Then, a set nursery reflections, the casement behind me was banged on the floor by a blow from the latter individual, and his black countenance looked lightingly through. So deliberate juxtaposition there of Heathcliff's dark appearance and then the appearance of him at the window, and blightingly connotations of being like a disease, like a plant plants and would get a blight, like you can get a potato blight, It's a kind of agricultural imagery as well, but the idea of he's blightening the doorstep effectively. Then he actually force his way in through the window. His hair and clothes were whitened with snow, and his sharp cannibal teeth, revealed by cold and wraths, gleamed through the dark. So again, we've said before about the kind of prejudice shown about Heathcliff as well, but obviously cannibal connotations of what Victorians would think of it as like savagery, and of course it's also taboo, kind of eating people, and it makes Heathcliff seem brutal, savage, dangerous, and also a sense of foreignness as well. Then, I cannot commit murder, I replied. Mr. Hindley stands sentinel with a knife and loaded pistol. So she does blab that there's Hindley ready to kill him. He's got his gun ready. Heathcliff, if I were you, I'd go stretch myself over a grave and die like a faithful dog. So that's interesting. That links to all the kind of dog references that we've had before. Like we said, where Heathcliff, his devotion to Catherine, he's like an alpha dog as well, isn't he, really? And the dogs kind of all cower from him and respect him as well. So interesting animal imagery there. Then when he flung himself on Earnshaw's weapon and wrenched it from his grasp, so they end up having a fight, Hindley and Heathcliff. The charge exploded and the knife. Remember, Hindley's got a special gun with a spring-loaded knife on it. The charge exploded and the knife, in springing back, closed in on its owner's wrist, so it's hurting Hindley. And remember what Isabella said about the two-pointed spear. It's hurting. His own weapon is hurting him. The weapon he was using for revenge, or planned to use for revenge, has now not exactly backfired, literally, because the gun could backfire, but the blade is hurting him. Wisdom of Isabella, you see. So this is a very action-packed sequence. It's full of dynamic verbs. It's full of really interesting imagery as well. Heathcliff pulled it away by main force, slitting up the flesh. So this is quite gory, actually, isn't it? So slitting up the flesh as it passed on and thrust it dripping into his pocket. He then took a stone, struck down the division between the two windows and sprang in. So he smashes his way into Wuthering Heights itself. His adversary had fallen senseless with excessive pain and the flow of blood that gushed from an artery or a large vein. So this is all very... I love the word visceral. It's very visceral. It's kind of the body. It's kind of bloody. It's gory. I think that's a great word. The ruffian kicked and trampled on him. So more dynamic verbs. And dashed, another one, his head repeatedly against the flags. In case you were wondering, you think, oh, that wouldn't hurt much if it's flags. It's flagstones, as in the hard stone floor of Wuthering Heights. So this is Heathcliff really at his most violent and brutal. Then we have, holding with one hand, meantime, to prevent me summoning Joseph, he exerted preterhuman self-denial, abstaining from finishing him completely. So somehow Heathcliff actually stops himself from killing Hindley. He's very close. But getting out of breath, he finally desisted and dragged the apparently inanimate body on the settle. So Hindley is effectively being knocked out here. He's been knocked unconscious. Tore off the sleeve of Earnshaw's coat and bound up the wound with brutal roughness, spitting and cursing during the operation as energetically as he'd kicked before. So even Heathcliff's care for Hindley is still violent and rough as well. Joseph will come in and think that Hindley has been killed by Heathcliff. There's this to do, thundered Heathcliff, that your master's mad, and should he last another month, I'll have him to an asylum. Which Heathcliff probably could do, because of being so wealthy and being a gentleman, he could easily persuade Dr. Kenneth probably to have him locked up. I wouldn't be surprised, but that doesn't actually happen. Come, I'm not going to nurse him. Wash that stuff away. Mind the sparks of your candle is more than half brandy. So again, that's more hyperbole, that Hindley has been drinking so much, and he's dehumanised. It is more than half brandy as well. So Joseph has to clean up. Heathcliff gave him a push on his knees in the middle of the blood and flung a towel to him, but instead of proceeding to dry it up, he joined his hands and began a prayer which excited my laughter from its odd phraseology. Which is a bit strange from Isabella, to be fair, but I think maybe it's because of such an exaggerated, heightened, dangerous situation. She reacts in a slightly odd way. Oh, I forgot you, said the tyrant. You shall do that. Down with you. And you conspire with him against me, do you, viper? There's work fit for you. He shook me till my teeth rattled and pitched me beside Joseph. So he violently shakes Isabella. He grabs her. So again, it's more the dynamic verbs as well. And he makes her tidy up the blood as well and clean up with Joseph down there, who steadily concluded his supplications and then rose, vowing he would set off for the Grange directly. So he's planning to report Heathcliff to Mr. Linton, who is obviously, remember, he's a magistrate, so he's the local legal figure, effectively. They didn't have police in this era. There's no police force. It required a great deal of labour to satisfy the old man that Heathcliff was not the aggressor. So Isabella does explain, well, actually, in this, it was Hindley who was attacking Heathcliff. He was there with a gun ready to shoot him. And the gun went off and it wasn't actually Heathcliff, it was Heathcliff. You could argue, well, he was defending himself. I mean, you can argue that. Heathcliff's response is obviously brutal and ruthless. Then we had, after I had done, I ventured on the unusual liberty of drawing near the fire, going round Earnshaw's seat and kneeling in the corner beside him. So this is sometime later, Earnshaw is recovered. I should have said that before that bit, but it doesn't matter. And Heathcliff is there as well. His forehead that I once thought so manly and now I think so diabolical. So that's of the devil. Diabolical is another great word there. Deliberate antithesis between man and devil there as well. Was shaded with a heavy cloud. His basilisk eyes were nearly quenched by sleeplessness. If you're familiar, obviously, with Harry Potter, you know about the basilisk, but even before they were in Harry Potter, basilisks were, obviously it's mentioned in this novel, but obviously they were long-established mythical creatures that went back to medieval times and could turn someone to stone just by looking at them. So again, that's why that is being pre-modified, basilisk eyes. So it's a very nice metaphor there as well. They were nearly quenched by sleeplessness and weeping perhaps for the lashes were wet then. His lips devoid of their ferocious sneer and sealed in an expression of unspeakable sadness. So again, this extremity of emotion, a romantic theme. Had it been another, I would have covered my face in the presence of such grief. In his case, I was gratified, and ignoble as it seems to insult a fallen enemy, I couldn't miss this chance of sticking in a dart. His weakness was the only time when I could taste the delight of paying wrong for wrong. Notice there, that links back to, remember what I said about Hindley's viewpoint of being very similar to the Old Testament eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Isabella succumbs to it here. She says, I can get a little bit of digging here and I can do something bad and for all the bad he's done and get a little bit of satisfaction for it. So even Isabella succumbs to it. But again, I think it adds to these much more profound qualities of Isabella as a character. She's not just a complete, she's not a weakling, like Edgar Linton, I think, is a lot weaker than her. She's got a toughness about it, and we see a little bit here. 5 minutes interruption. One might suppose you've never opened a Bible in your life. If God afflict your enemies, surely that ought to suffice you. It is both mean and presumptuous to add your torture to his. So this is Nelly interrupting there about saying, well, it's like you're not being a good Christian to do this, to kind of delight in his own suffering. But what misery laid on Heathcliff couldn't tempt me unless I had a hand in it. I'd rather he suffered less if I might cause his sufferings, and he might know that I was the cause. Oh, I owe him so much. On only one condition can I hope to forgive him. It is, if I may take an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. For every wrench of agony, return a wrench. Reduce him to my level. So there you go. So Isabella is now of that same mindset, to the idea of getting revenge. As he was the first to injure, make him the first to implore pardon. So again, that's deliberate antithesis there, that injure and implore pardon. It is utterly impossible I could ever be revenged, and therefore I cannot forgive him. So look how tough Isabella actually is. She's changed as a person. She's effectively saying her experiences have really toughened her up. I mean, that's obviously not a good thing, but it's testament to her strength of character, obviously, as written by Bronte, but I think Bronte's written her as a strong female character, and I think she's deliberately meant to surprise the reader with some of her reactions here and the boldness and courage that she shows. Leading up my arm, every inch of me is as sore as if I'm fighting with a legion of imps. So again, more devil, hellish imagery as well. So while people don't really rise from their grave, or last night she might have witnessed a repulsive scene. So again, that links to the supernatural theme of the novel there as well. Heathcliff is described here as well because he's only half man, so much, and the rest fiend. So again, more devil lexis as well. And the idea of Heathcliff as an evil supernatural being. Mr. Edger looked up like me to the countenance of our mutual foe, absorbed in his anguish, seemed insensible to anything around him. The longer he stood, the plainer his reflections revealed their blackness through his features. And again, his blackness through his features, it's meant to link to evil, but again, you could link it if you're exploring themes of ethnicity, then you could think of it in those terms as well, actually, couldn't you? Oh, if God would give me but strength to strangle him on my last agony, I'd go to hell with joy, groaned the impatient man, writhing to rise. So this is Hindley. At the Grange, everyone knows your sister would have been living now had it not been for Mr. Heathcliff. So Heathcliff is receiving the blame for Catherine's death. What do you think about that? Do you think Heathcliff is responsible for the death of Catherine? Or do you think Catherine is responsible for her death? Or do you think it's both of them? I will let you think about that. Then, when I recollect how happy we were, how happy Catherine was before he came, I'm fit to curse the day. Interesting, isn't it? I stared full at him and laughed scornfully. The clouded windows of hell flashed a moment towards me. The fiend which usually looked out, fiend again, however, was so dimmed and drowned that I did not fear to hazard another sound of derision. Get up and begone out of my sight, the mourner. And so, get up, wretched idiot, before I stamp you to death. A threat of violence there as well. Look at that again. If poor Catherine had trusted you and assumed the ridiculous, contemptible, degrading title of Mrs. Heathcliff, nice bit of incrementum there, ridiculous, contemptible, degrading title of Mrs. Heathcliff, She would as soon have presented a similar picture. She wouldn't have borne your abominable behaviour quietly. Her detestation and disgust must have found voice. If you want to rub Heathcliff up the wrong way, then insult his relationship with Catherine. It's going to send him angry. Of course, what happens next, Heathcliff is totally to blame. It's, again, more violence from him. He reacts violently to this. The back of the settle and the Earnshaws person interposed between me and him, so instead of endeavouring to reach me, he snatched a dinner knife from the table and flung it at my head. It struck beneath my ear and stopped the sentence I was uttering. I would guess that a Wuthering Heights dinner knife would be a sharp knife, not like what we have in the modern day with our kind of blunted, serrated knives that you would use, when you're having your dinner at home. I would think this would be a much more medieval type of, almost like a miniature carving knife is my guess, much more kind of rustic. So that's why when it would be thrown, it would stick into something. So this is really threatening. He has picked up a knife and thrown it at his wife here. Then it struck beneath my ear and stopped the sentence I was uttering, but pulling it out, I sprang to the door and delivered another. That doesn't mean a knife, that means another sentence. So she stands up for herself, which I hope went a little deeper than his missile. So that's a really nice metaphor there again as well, where you've got Isabella insults Heathcliff in some way. We don't know what it is. Again, as she's the one telling the story, she may again disguise exactly what she said. She may not want to repeat whatever pejorative phrase she used, whatever insult that she used. The last glimpse I caught of him was a furious rush on his part, checked by the embrace of his host, and both fell locked together on the hearth. In my flight through the kitchen, I bid Joseph speed to his master. I knocked over Hareton, who was hanging a litter of puppies from a chair back in the doorway. That, Bronte deliberately there, echoes, remember when Heathcliff ran away with Isabella and hanged her own puppy? Interesting connection. Yeah, see? Then we have, I bounded, leaped and flew. So there's more incrementum there. Bounded, leaped, flew. So she doesn't literally fly. It's a metaphor as well. Down the steep road. Then we've seen before in the novel Thrushcross Grange as a beacon of light. Thrushcross Grange is associated with light. So here it represents her escape. It represents freedom. And in some ways she's moving from the hell of Wuthering Heights to the heaven of Thrushcross Grange. And far rather would I could be condemned to a perpetual dwelling in the infernal regions, than even for one night abide even the roof of Wuthering Heights again. So she's saying staying at Wuthering Heights is worse than being in hell. So you've got that connection there as well. Then she stepped on a chair, kissed Edgar's and Catherine's portraits, bestowed a similar salute on me, and descended to the carriage, accompanied by Fanny, hooray, who yelped with wild joy at recovering her mistress. So she's reunited with her little dog, Fanny. Hooray. And again, I suppose kissing the portraits, it shows her innate goodness, really, and she forgives Edgar Linton for his rejection of her as well. But a regular correspondence was established between her and my master when things were more settled. So they did write to each other. Things got a little bit better, but they were never united again. So Isabella leaves. She ends up in London. I believe her new abode was in the south, near London. There she had a son born a few months subsequent to her escape. He was christened Linton, and from the first she reported him to be an ailing, peevish creature. So Linton Heathcliff also shares the Linton family weakness. They're not the strongest physically, but I think really importantly here as well is this is Isabella's ultimate act of revenge on Heathcliff. This is clever. She's like it's ultimate trolling of Heathcliff. She's named their son Linton Heathcliff, so Linton as a first name. So of course when you're reading it, and it's really confusing. You've got all these different repeated names, but actually, the choice for Isabella from Bronte as a cat, to give Isabella that ultimate, I almost swore then, ultimate insult. Let's just say that ultimate insult to Heathcliff by naming their son after the family that he despises, and a reminder about Catherine's own name changing. She changed from Catherine Earnshaw to Catherine Linton. It's a reminder of that marriage, isn't it? That Heathcliff despises the Lintons. He despises Edgar Linton. But he's going to always have his son called Linton Heathcliff. Genius. Though I would give no information he discovered through some of the other servants, both her place of residence and the existence of the child. So Nelly says this. Remember, though, Nelly is an unreliable narrator, so perhaps to Lockwood she's saying that she didn't blab where Isabella and Linton were living and it was other servants, but actually it could be her, couldn't it? Because she's always been inconsistent with how she either helps or hinders Heathcliff in life. It's possible, isn't it? Take her at face value, it's another servant, but read between the lines, possibly she would have revealed it. And she may be disguising. And Bronte, obviously, she takes advantage of the narrative style of this novel and the idea of the unreliable narrator. She takes advantage of that as well. But I'll have it, he said, when I want it. They may reckon on that. I'll have it. So again, the son has been described as it. Linton Heathcliff will become a tool, effectively. He's not interested in his son out of any parental duty or love or anything like that. When I could get him to listen, I saw it pleased him that his sister had left her husband, whom he abhorred with an intensity which the mildness of his nature would scarcely seem to allow. So this is Nelly talking about when she tells Edgar Linton that Isabella's managed to escape, and he seems fairly happy about it, which is good. But he was too good to be thoroughly unhappy long. He didn't pray for Catherine's soul to haunt him. Time brought resignation and melancholy sweeter than common joy. That's another romantic idea about melancholy as well as an extreme form of sadness. But Edgar Linton comes to terms with it. He's dealing with the grief, ultimately, is superior to Heathcliff's response to grief. So he responds, thinking of Catherine's memory with ardent tender love and hopeful aspiring to the better world, where he doubted not she was gone. So that the better world is really a euphemism for heaven, or the afterlife, the afterlife, heaven being the good one, obviously, and Edgar Linton being essentially a good person. He imagines that that's where she's gone, and he's more at peace with himself by this point. And he had earthly consolation of affections also. For a few days I said he seemed, regardless of the puny successor to the departed, that coldness melted as fast as snow in April. So there's a natural simile there as well. And he does develop a bond with young Catherine, who he always calls Cathy. The little one was always Cathy. Sometimes it's easier to write about the two Catherines and think of Cathy as the younger one in the way that Edgar Linton does, and then think of Catherine as the older one. Sometimes it's easier to think of them in those terms. Then it formed into a distinction from the mother and yet a connection with her, and his attachment sprang from its relation to her far more than it being his own. So the bond he has with her is kind of based on his relationship with Catherine rather than just thinking of her as his daughter. It doesn't mean in a bad way. It's just how he perceives the relationship. They had both been fond husbands and were both attached to their children. This is Nelly comparing Hindley with Edgar Linton and how they've dealt with losing their wives and that whole process of grief. So they're both quite similar in some ways, Nelly observes. They've both been fond husbands and were both attached to their children. and I could not see how they shouldn't have both have taken the same road for good or evil. But I thought in my mind, Hindley, with apparently the stronger head, has shown himself sadly the worse and the weaker man. There's been references to how fit to essentially and hardy Hindley Earnshaw was compared to the more frail constitution of Edgar Linton. But Edgar Linton's dealt with it better ultimately. When his ship struck, the captain abandoned his post, and the crew, instead of trying to save her, rushed into riot and confusion, leaving no hope for their luckless vessel. So I didn't highlight that, but that's a really good metaphor there. It's like he's a ship that's lost its crew and run aground effectively. Linton, on the contrary, displayed the true courage of a loyal and faithful soul. He trusted God, and God comforted him. And that there really is a form of chiasmus as well, where you've got that cross structure. He trusted God, God comforted him. So Edgar Linton has come out of it looking more the good soul, effectively. The end of Earnshaw was what might have been expected. It followed fast on his sisters. There were scarcely 6 months between them. We at the Grange never got a very succinct account of his state preceding it, and all they did learn was on occasion of going to aid in the preparations for the funeral. Mr. Kenneth, that's the doctor, came to announce the events to my master. So he dies as well. So we get this account from the doctor, Mr. Kenneth, or Dr. Kenneth. Heathcliff he's rapidly regaining flesh since he lost his better half. And that means that's that standard idiom that's used to describe a wife. My better half, you'd probably have heard that. Hindley, he died true to his character, drunk as a lord, and that's another idiom as well, drunk as a lord. He's barely 27, it seems. That's your own age. You would have thought you were born in 1 year. Often when you read classic novels, characters are younger than you imagine them, or they're younger than they're definitely depicted on TV or film. They're often played by actors who are a little bit older than how they are in the novels. But so you may not have thought of Hindley only being 27. But the numbers all add up when you think about it. So Nelly was close to Hindley growing up as well, which is a little worth remembering. He shook his head and advised that Heathcliff should be let alone, affirming if the truth were known, Hareton would be found little else than a beggar. So as I was looking, I've just highlighted this bit because I meant to highlight this bit and I forgot. Because Nelly assumes that Hareton, being Edgar Linton's nephew, would end up living with Edgar Linton at Thrushcross Grange and he would look after him. That's the most logical thing to happen, but it doesn't. Probably because the story's more interesting if Hareton is left with Heathcliff, I think is the main kind of reason. So, besides, I reminded him that the child Hareton was his wife's nephew, and in the absence of nearer kin, he ought to act as its guardian, and he ought to and must inquire how the property was left and look over the concerns of his brother-in-law. He was unfit for attending to such matters then, but he bid me to speak to his lawyer, and elect permitted me to go. His lawyer had been at Earnshaw's also. I called at the village and asked him to accompany me. He shook his head and advised that Heathcliff should be let alone, affirming if the truth were known, Hareton would be found little else than a beggar. So this is the reason, really, that's been given in the novel why Hareton isn't going to end up living with his uncle. Yeah, it doesn't really make that much sense for him to be living with Heathcliff if you really think too hard about it. But there is a problem because for Hareton, he will end up as a beggar because his father died in debt. He said the whole property is mortgaged and the sole chance for the natural heir is to allow him an opportunity of creating some interest in the creditor's heart. They may be inclined to deal leniently towards him. Of course, that creditor is Heathcliff. So Heathcliff is wealthy now. He's been effectively playing like Gimmerton Monopoly. He's been buying up a lot of property. He owns property. He's wealthy. He's going to own the Heights now because it was mortgaged because of Hindley's gambling obsession. Heathcliff's opinion of Hindley is very low. That fool's body should be buried at the crossroads without ceremony of any kind. He spent the night in drinking himself to death deliberately. Broken this morning, for we heard him snorting like a horse, so an animal simile there, zoomorphism. I sent for Kenneth and he came, but not till the beast had changed into carrion. That's a really powerful word to describe a dead body, because carrion is what scavengers feed off. You know, like carrion feeders like crows and vultures, they feed off carrion, like dead bodies. So it really dehumanises Hindley. So Bronte is making clear Heathcliff's contempt for Hindley even in death as well. He was both dead and cold and stark. Mr. Heathcliff said I might have my own way there too, and he desired me to remember that the money for the whole affair came out of his pocket. So Heathcliff has to pay for the funeral, but it's not a very big affair by any means. This is Heathcliff to Hareton. Now, my bonny lad, you are mine, and we'll see if one tree won't grow as crooked as another, with the same wind to twist it. So, again, you remember what I said earlier on about trees at Wuthering Heights and they're being shaped by their environment. And I said you can decide yourself whether an upbringing is going to change someone or whether your qualities are innate. And in Heathcliff's case, that kind of innate badness. Keep an eye on Hareton. See if you think Heathcliff's idea of bringing Hareton up badly is going to permanently distort his character as well. That boy must go back with me to Thrushcross Grange, so there is nothing in the world less yours than he is. Does Linton say so? He demanded. Of course he has ordered me to take him, I replied. Well, said the scoundrel, we'll not argue the subject now, but I have a fancy to try my hand at rearing a young one. So he plans to bring up Hareton as a junior Heathcliff, effectively. The guest was now the master of Wuthering Heights, so that's antithetical. I was going to say antithesis. I was blending the two. It's the same thing. Antithesis. The guest was now the master of Wuthering Heights. He held firm possession and proved to the attorney, who in this turn proved it to Mr. Linton, that Earnshaw had mortgaged every yard of land he owned for cash to supply his mania for gaming, and he, Heathcliff, was the mortgagee. In that manner, Hareton, who should now be the first gentleman in the neighbourhood, was reduced to a state of complete dependence on his father's inveterate enemy, and lives in his own house as a servant, deprived of the advantages of wages, quite unable to right himself because of his friendlessness and his ignorance that he has been wronged. So the novel is now at the end of chapter 17. It's now catching up, or has caught up, to the present of the novel, where Lockwood had gone to Wuthering Heights to meet Heathcliff, and Thrushcross Grange is empty and he's renting it out, and we are catching up to that. There's still a few more things that we're going to find out happen, but we're getting much closer to the present day of the novel at this point. So anyway, thank you for listening and watching, and hopefully you've been making your notes as well. Like, comment, subscribe, leave a comment. I already said comment, but you could always leave two. Thank you very much, and have a great time until the next one. Thank you. Goodbye.